Okay, so welcome everybody, and a very warm welcome to Heather Batey, who is the owner and director of operations at Reach. It's a community-based rehabilitation service for children and adults affected by moderate to severe traumatic brain injury. So thanks very much for joining me, Heather.
It's a pleasure.
So we'll start with you giving us some background to your company Reach, and if you can give us an idea of the sorts of services that you offer.
Yeah, no problems. So we set Reach up 27 years ago. I set up and ran the Leeds Head Injury Service initially, and ran that for a few years. And then we felt that we could provide a really good home-based rehab service for clients out there in the community. So we left the NHS, my colleague and I as a neuropsychologist, and we set up Reach. We're always with the view to providing a top-up service to the NHS. So we're additional to services out there. Not to do case management and not to do longer term care. So we've been ticking along, we've been developing, we've got about 80 odd neuro-OTs, neuropsychologists work for Reach, all part-time, and we provide assessment and treatment for adults and children with mild, moderate and severe brain injury cases. So the types of assessments that we'll do is a full rehab assessment would be a neuro-OT, neuropsychology and assessment of rehab prediction. So that's looking at predictive outcomes for these more severe cases. We would do also a post-concussive syndrome assessment, which I know we're going to have a wee chat about in a minute or two. That's looking at a bespoke PCS assessment based on good practice and a treatment model that we've developed over the last 8 years or so. And we also provide neuropsych assessments and neuro-OT assessments, but all for traumatic brain injury cases, although we are seeing a little bit more ABI cases coming in as well, and also children. And we're in the process of developing a mild head trauma service, but I can tell you about that maybe in the next 6 months.
Thanks, Heather, that's great.
Okay.
And I don't think you mentioned there, but when did you start the company?
Started 27 years ago.
27 years ago, right.
I know, a long time.
Right.
Seen lots of changes in the industry over that time.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you mentioned in recent email correspondence that we had that you attended the World Brain Injury Congress in Canada last year, and you presented some research findings on post-concussion syndrome. So could you tell us a little bit about just how you found the conference? Obviously, it's quite a way to go for that, and also a little bit about the research itself. Yeah,
absolutely. So we looked at the different areas of innovative working in the UK, and we felt that this is going back a few years, we felt that there was really very little for the milder range. We were getting referrals from case managers saying, we need an assessment of our brain injury client, but it's a mild case and your rehab assessment is too detailed, too full on. So we got our heads of service together and thought, how can we develop a service for this client group alone? And again, we looked at the research that was out there and pulled together our post-concussive assessment and rehab plan. And that was something that's been quite innovative. And so we put that forward to be considered at the World Federation of Brain Injury Conference in Canada. And we got accepted to present our poster and a informal oral presentation, which was brilliant. And I felt a real academic going on the plane with my poster presentation. Brilliant. And my colleague Lisa Pell came with me, which is great. So the presentation was really based on an assessment and treatment model for PCS in adults. And it was looking at the qualitative outcomes that we had achieved. And this is a unique service, and we've been running it for up to 8 years now. It started off slow, but more 8 years. So as you'd expect, the assessment was based around assessment, formal assessment, standardised assessments, and also a qualitative semi-structured interview. And typically the areas that these clients would struggle with would be memory, planning, attention, concentration, anger, anxiety, but also structuring the day-to-day life and looking at the vocational options. And we felt that it was important to be able to hone in and give these client groups a toolbox of strategies so that they could work with them going forward. And it was important that this client group was great to work with. So I need to tell you that they are insightful, they've got a good awareness, they're motivated, and these guys wanted to get back to work, but were struggling. So what we decided to do was try to focus on the difficulties that they were having, but the research showed that some of the areas that we didn't focus on had a positive impact. So things like they were returning to work, they were re-establishing family connections, and that wasn't what we were working on. We were working on anxiety management and different strategies, but they were putting these strategies into functional context. And so that gave us much better outcomes, even though we weren't actually working on some of those areas. And it showed the transference of skills that these clients could have. And actually, the further considerations of this research project showed that should all clients with a PCS be carry out an endocrinology assessment, because there's quite a lot of crossover between skills and presentation of neuroendocrinology dysfunction and PCS. And it's important to rule that out. So we recommend that to all the case managers now. Go and get an endocrinology assessment just to make sure that this is or isn't a problem. And also, should PCS be termed PCS after 2 years? I'm not sure it should, because if you've still got ongoing symptoms 2 years down the line, it's not a post-concussive syndrome, it's more of a mild stroke moderate TBI, and that has big connotations in the medical legal world, isn't it? So it's been really quite useful. Effectively, the research highlighted that if a PCS client has their problems and their issues addressed in a timely, focused fashion, these clients using toolbox of strategies can actually get back to normal functional performance across all domains while using strategies, but it has to be at the right time. And I think we need to get in early. So it was really good for us. And actually going over to Canada was brilliant, because we met up with a whole lot of really innovative OTs and clinicians. And we've got this really WhatsApp group now going with OTs in one in the States, one in New Zealand, one in Canada, and me. And it's brilliant. So we're sharing knowledge, sharing information. So yeah, it was all good. And we went to Niagara Falls as well. Fab.
Right, fantastic. sounds very good. And very interesting, the research. So probably like many of us, your clinicians have been doing assessments over video and remotely. What do you think you've learned as a company about the benefits and possibilities of remote and video contact during lockdown?
Yeah, it has been quite an interesting 3 months, hasn't it? We're all thrown into this this remote working very, very swiftly. And I think for brain injury especially, it's really important to build up a good relationship with the client's family, and develop a trusting relationship. And I think that can be quite tricky when you're on a screen like this. Although it can work quite well, I think it is so much better face to face. So with the more moderate and severe brain injury cases, you'd always want to go back and see them in their own homes and provide assessment and treatment. However, being OTs and creative as we all are, we've had really quite positive outcomes from some of the sessions and some of the areas that we've been focusing in on. And especially for the more severe brain injury cases, we've been linking more with the families, which we might not have done had we been in there face to face. So that's been pretty productive, and using different platforms that we're all using, with Zoom and WhatsApp and FaceTime. But going through some of the treatment sessions, for example, looking at their anxiety or looking at planning and organising skills, we've been able to be quite creative by providing the clinical guidelines and the theory online like this, and doing presentations to them, but also being much more practical by having different sessions. So instead of having maybe one clinical session a day, we're maybe having 3. And so a good example, for example, would be a simultaneous planning and organising session that we're doing. I thought this might be quite useful to tell you. So our clinician was providing a baking session. Now, this is typical OT stuff, a bit like making a cup of tea. However, underneath that, we were looking at planning and organising skills, and to see whether they could follow through instructions. And so we had 3 Zoom sessions in the one day. The first one was a planning session, what's needed, the research behind it, getting the ingredients. The next was the performance session, where the clinician was actually baking at the same time in her kitchen that the client was baking in his kitchen. And they were doing the same stages at the same time, reflecting back on the different parts. And then the third one was a reflection session, where they were looking at the outcomes to see whether it went well, what you would do differently. And then they would then look to transfer those skills into different functional tasks. And so that's good rehab in practice. And it's just being a little bit more creative, I guess. The key thing with the remote working, though, is we're seeing a massive impact on our clients' mental health. And I guess that's not just with clients, though, John, that's with everybody across the board. I know that I've been getting cabin fever as well, and had to use some strategies to keep me kind of upbeat and progressive. So having regular rehab sessions, we've been able to keep the clients on track, give them a degree of normality, keep a little bit of structure in the day-to-day sessions, but also now allowing them to progress positively. But also it gives us an opportunity to pick up any red flags that are along the way that we can reflect back to the case managers, to instructors. So it's not all been bad. We've been able to make quite good gains with our clients. It's given us a different way of learning as well.
Yeah.
You found that with your company too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it sounds really positive. And you mentioned that you'd had good feedback from the clinicians themselves about the way that they've been working. What have they been saying to you?
Yeah, well, they've been, I think in some ways, when you go out and see clients, yes, you get better feedback because you can see them face to face, you see the area they're living in. But you can be quite, I think they've enjoyed being quite flexible, they've enjoyed being quite creative, and also they've enjoyed no travel, because we all spend such a long time traveling, don't we? And if you can get the same gains, that is actually a win-win, a plus really, isn't it? And certainly we found that we were working quite a lot remotely with our post-concussive syndrome clients anyway, because they've got good insight and awareness. And we were doing quite a few sessions online anyway. So it's been a natural progression for the milder range. And we will continue to do that. We are back out seeing clients face-to-face now. And we're doing a bit of a combination between remote working and face-to-face working, and it's actually working quite well. So we're doing maybe 1 or 2 sessions a week, and then we're reinforcing it with remote sessions. So having that flexibility has been quite good, and they all work from home anyway. So the working from home hasn't been an issue. It's just been the actual working at home over platforms. Yeah. It's been positive.
Right. Well, yeah. That brings me on to my final question about, and I imagine, like most rehabilitation providers, people are thinking about, not just about how to get back to face-to-face contact, but perhaps how to work a little bit differently going forward and integrate those remote things. Is that something you've got in mind with your company? You're planning to, it sounds like you are, but you're planning to sort of keep going with those things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've had we looked at the last 3 months, and at the end of June, we sat down with the senior team and said, right, okay, how has this worked? How could this work better? What messages are we taking to go forward? And it has been quite interesting, because we're going to be working much more remotely with our pre-CS clients, and that actually gives us a lot more scope as well, because that means that the assessing clinicians don't need to live near the clients. So we can use our national team much more creatively by doing this on a remote basis. And so we're going to be going forward with our PCS clients on a remote basis, not so with the pediatrics, but more with the adults. But also there are some elements of the more severe cases that we can actually provide online as well. And this is a really good medium for clients to go forward with too, to learn as a teaching and a rehab tool. So, with cases going forward, we will we'll have the benefit of no travel, so that's a win, isn't it? There'll be swifter access to rehab, so we don't have to appoint somebody to work with that client. Then there'll be no waiting times. We can do this remotely quite quickly, and that means that the clients can complete their rehab journey swifter as well. And so it is actually quite a win-win situation. But we just need to make sure that you're going to continue getting the good outcomes. And there will always be some clients who will not be able to link into remote working. And we just need to be mindful of that. But I think it's thrown us all into a situation that we may well have gone down that route anyway, but a lot quicker perhaps.
Yeah.
And it's made people feel a lot more comfortable being on screen, which I wouldn't have felt comfortable being on screen 6 months ago, but you have to live with the times, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I was just thinking it'd be interesting to for somebody to do some research on sort of integrated rehab approaches, face-to-face, with a mixture of video and remote working, and what sort of outcomes would you
absolutely.
get compared with just a purely face-to-face approach? I'm sure there would be potentially much better outcomes.
Yeah, well, I think so. And also you have to be creative and flexible, don't you? Because everybody's different, and you can have 2 brain injury clients with the same infarct, the same level of dysfunction, but actually function in a very different way because of their skill deficits. And some may well work quite well on a remote platform and some might not. And so that's always the tricky situation. You can't say, this is the correct pathway for this client to get the best outcome. You have to be a bit creative. And by doing flexible things like the baking, we've had people doing all sorts of different interesting, making shelves, doing job descriptions, having planning interviews, doing all sorts of interesting things, has been really productive on a day-to-day basis for them. So it's been very functional and very productive for them, so that they can take it on to a different level. And I think you're right, there has to be a mix. And so everybody will be going down this route to see what they can use remotely and what they can't.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So that's it, Heather. Thank you very much for joining us. That's really, it's a quick snapshot, I know, but it's been really informative. It's been good to hear about what you've been up to.
Thank you very much, and it's good to see you again, even if remotely.
Even if remotely, yeah. Thanks a lot then, Heather.
Okay, cheers. Thanks then.